Before Blake Shelton collapsed on live television, there was a moment almost no one talks about. Not the stumble, not the shock, the pause. Less than a second long, but heavy enough to change the room. If you rewatch the clip, you'll see it. The smile is there, the joke lands, and then something shifts. His eyes don't track the room anymore. They drift, like his mind just stepped somewhere darker. That's the moment people missed, and it's the moment everything started unraveling. At first, fans thought it was just another on-air scare. A long day, bright lights, maybe dehydration. That's what the headlines ran with. Clean explanations, safe explanations. But the reaction online didn't match that story. People didn't move on. They replayed it, slowed it down, zoomed in, because something about it felt wrong. Too quiet, too human. And when a moment sticks like that, it usually means there's more underneath. What the cameras showed was brief. What they didn't show mattered more. Because just minutes later, reports say Blake received a FaceTime call that didn't come from a producer or a network executive. It came from Kelly Clarkson. And according to people close to the situation, she didn't ask what happened. She already knew. That detail alone raised questions. How did she recognize it so fast? And why did this moment feel familiar to her? Fans assumed this was sudden. It wasn't. This was pressure stacking quietly for years. Personal loss, public scrutiny, the kind of questions that never really stop coming, no matter how many jokes you tell to deflect them. Blake built a career on being the guy who laughs first, who keeps things light. But humor can only carry weight for so long before it starts cracking under it. And then there was the timing. That's what made people pause. The interview aired months after major changes in his personal life. Fans noticed. Online discussions started connecting dots, maybe too fast, maybe unfairly. But curiosity doesn't wait for confirmation, especially when a clip feels emotionally unfinished. Doctors later pointed to dehydration mixed with anxiety. That's the official version, the version that fits neatly into a headline. But fans weren't fully convinced, not because they wanted drama, but because they recognized the feeling. That moment when your body reacts before you can explain yourself. When you've been holding it together just long enough for everything to slip at once. And this is where the story changes, because this wasn't just about Blake Shelton on a couch. It was about why this moment lingered, why it still circulates, why people keep watching that pause instead of the collapse. Because sometimes the loudest part of a story is the second right before everything gives way. The clip didn't spread because it was dramatic. It spread because it felt unfinished. One moment, Blake Shelton is answering a question, relaxed, familiar, in control. The next, the footage cuts. No context, no explanation, just enough to make people uneasy. And that's all the internet needs. Within hours, the video was everywhere, reposted with different captions, different theories, different tones. Some called it a health scare, others called it a breakdown. But most people just ask the same thing. What actually happened? Short clips do something dangerous. They turn fragments into conclusions. A few seconds become a full story, even when the story doesn't exist yet. Fans slowed the video down, studying Blake's posture, the way his hand tightened, the split second where his expression dropped. None of it proved anything, but it didn't need to. The uncertainty itself became the hook, and once uncertainty takes hold, panic follows fast. What made this clip hit harder was Blake's image. He's never been the fragile one. He's the steady presence, the joke maker, the guy who shrugs things off. So when someone like that looks unsteady, even briefly, it rattles people. Viewers weren't just watching a celebrity moment, they were watching a role crack. And that's why it didn't feel like just another viral mishap. As the clip circulated, new versions popped up. Some zoomed in, others cut out the laughter beforehand. A few added ominous music. Each edit pushed the story further from reality and closer to fear. Not because people wanted to lie, but because the algorithm rewards intensity. Calm explanations don't travel. Suspicion does. Still, not everyone bought into the panic. Some fans pointed out how often Blake exaggerates for laughs. Others reminded people he'd just finished long stretches of work, but those voices were quieter. Panic is louder than patience. And the more the clip was shared, the more it felt like something was being hidden, even if nothing actually was. That's when the question shifted, not just what happened on camera, but what happened off it, what wasn't shown, what didn't make the final cut. Because when a moment goes viral without context, people assume context was removed on purpose. And that assumption changed everything, because now the clip wasn't just a scare, it was a mystery. And mysteries don't fade, they pull people in deeper, especially when the person at the center refuses to explain it right away. But the truth is, the panic didn't start with the collapse, it started with what the clip didn't show. And once fans began looking beyond the footage, they started noticing things that had been there long before the cameras ever rolled. The moment didn't change because of what Blake Shelton did, it changed because of what he was asked. Up until then, the interview followed the usual rhythm. Light jokes, familiar stories, safe ground. The kind of conversation Blake has navigated for years without effort. But then the tone shifted. Subtle enough that casual viewers might have missed it, sharp enough that others felt it immediately. According to viewers and reports circulating online, the question wasn't framed as an attack, it was polite, calm, almost casual. But it landed heavy. It wasn't about music or touring or the next project, it pointed straight at parts of Blake's life he'd spent years deflecting with humor. And in that split second, you can see the shift. The laughter comes a beat too late. The smile tightens. His words slow, like his brain is choosing caution over instinct. Fans who re-watched the clip noticed how his body reacted before his voice did. A deeper breath, a slight lean forward, his eyes dropping instead of scanning the room. None of that proves intent, but it shows discomfort. And discomfort on live television doesn't stay contained. It spreads fast, especially when viewers sense someone has been cornered without raising their voice. What made the question feel different was its timing, not just within the interview, but within Blake's life. Reports suggest it came during a period when he was already navigating major personal changes behind the scenes. That context matters, because a question that might feel manageable one day can feel overwhelming on another. Fans weren't reacting to the words alone. They were reacting to how exposed he suddenly looked. There's also been online discussion about boundaries. Some viewers claimed certain topics had been avoided in recent interviews. Others pointed to moments where Blake redirected similar questions with jokes in the past. This time, there was no redirection, just a pause, and that pause spoke louder than any answer could. That's when people realized this wasn't about catching someone off guard, it was about pressure meeting the wrong moment. Live TV doesn't allow space to regroup. There's no edit, no reset. When something lands too hard, it lands in real time. And the shift was immediate. The room felt different. Even through the screen, viewers sensed it. The rhythm broke, the comfort vanished. And once that happens, the body starts making decisions faster than the mind can explain. That question didn't cause the moment on its own, but it opened a door Blake had been holding shut for a long time. And once it cracked open, everything he'd been carrying rushed toward the surface. Kelly Clarkson didn't need an explanation. According to people familiar with the moment, when she saw what happened, she recognized it immediately. Not as drama, not as a headline, but as something she'd lived through herself. That's why her reaction stood out. While others were scrambling for answers, she already understood the feeling behind it. Kelly has talked openly in the past about what pressure does to you when it piles up quietly. Long before Blake's moment, she described anxiety hitting without warning. Not during chaos, but during normal conversations, smiling on the outside while your chest tightens, holding it together until your body decides it can't anymore. When fans learned she reached out to Blake right after the incident, it made sense. This wasn't concern out of curiosity, it was recognition. Reports suggest that when Kelly checked in, she didn't ask what caused it. She focused on slowing things down, breathing, grounding, the basics. That detail matters because it shows she wasn't reacting to the spectacle, she was reacting to the symptoms, and you only do that when you felt them before. The connection between Kelly and Blake isn't just professional. They've spent years in similar environments. Long tapings, public scrutiny, personalized, dissected for entertainment. Both leaned on humor as a shield. Both learned how to perform strength even when things weren't steady behind the scenes. Kelly has admitted that for a long time she didn't realize how much she was carrying until her body forced her to stop. That's why her response felt different from the rest of the noise. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. And quiet responses often carry the most truth. Fans picked up on that. They noticed how Kelly spoke about pressure later on, choosing her words carefully, never turning Blake's moment into a talking point. To outsiders, it might have looked like a sudden scare. To someone who's lived through that kind of internal overload, it looked familiar. The kind of moment you don't forget because it changes how you listen to people afterward, especially the ones who joke the most. Kelly knew instantly because she recognized the warning signs, the pauses, the forced calm, the moment when your body stops negotiating. And that's what made her reaction so telling. It suggested this wasn't just about one interview or one question. It was about a pattern finally reaching its limit. And once people understood why Kelly reacted the way she did, they started looking back at Blake's behavior differently. Not as entertainment, but as someone who had been signaling longer than anyone realized. What happened on that stage didn't start that day. It started years earlier, in ways that were easy to miss because Blake Shelton never let them show for long. He became known as the guy who could absorb anything and turn it into a joke. Awards, breakups, headlines, even criticism. Humor wasn't just his personality, it was his survival tool. But pressure doesn't disappear when you laugh at it. It just changes shape. Over time, Blake's schedule grew heavier, not lighter. Touring, recording, television commitments, public appearances stacked back to back. And on top of that came the expectation to always be on, always charming, always unbothered. Fans rarely see how exhausting that role can become because it's designed to hide the cost. There were small signs, though. Interviews where he talked about feeling older than his age. Moments where he joked about being tired in ways that felt a little too real. Decisions to step back from certain commitments that fans chalked up to lifestyle changes. But taken together, they suggested something else. A man slowly running on reserve while pretending nothing had changed. Country music culture plays a role in that too. It rewards toughness, stoicism, the ability to push through without complaint. Vulnerability isn't celebrated, it's sidestepped with humor or drowned out with work. Blake fit that mold perfectly. He made light of stress before it ever had the chance to be taken seriously. And then there's the personal side. Public relationships invite public opinions, whether you ask for them or not. Every appearance comes with questions that reopen old wounds. Even when the answers stay polite, the emotional cost doesn't disappear. Carrying that weight quietly takes effort, and effort drains energy in ways people don't see. Fans often assume success makes life easier. In reality, it can make pressure constant. There's no off switch, no private moment that doesn't risk becoming a headline. Over time, that kind of visibility tightens around you, even when everything looks fine from the outside. So when people say the moment felt sudden, that's only because the buildup was invisible. Pressure doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. And when someone spends years deflecting instead of releasing it, the body eventually steps in. That's what fans overlooked, not because they weren't paying attention, but because Blake made it easy to overlook. He kept smiling, he kept joking, he kept moving forward. And by the time the signs became obvious, the pressure had already been there far longer than anyone realized. What really pushed this moment into overdrive wasn't just what happened, it was when it happened. Timing has a way of changing how people interpret everything, especially online. Fans didn't just watch the clip in isolation, they placed it on a timeline, and once they did, speculation took off. According to viewers piecing things together, the interview aired during a stretch when Blake Shelton's personal life had already been under intense discussion. Major changes had happened months earlier, and while nothing was being openly addressed, people noticed patterns. Fewer appearances, shorter answers, a shift in energy that felt subtle but consistent. On its own, none of it meant much. Together, it created a sense that something unresolved was lingering in the background. That's when fans started counting days, not because they were looking for trouble, but because the timing felt too precise to ignore. Online conversations pointed out how the interview lined up with personal milestones Blake never publicly acknowledged. Again, nothing confirmed, just observations. But the internet thrives on observation, especially when silence leaves space for interpretation. There were also rumors circulating about boundaries. Some fans claimed certain topics had quietly disappeared from recent interviews. Others said they noticed Blake redirecting personal questions more often than before. None of that was officially confirmed, but once people believe boundaries exist, they pay close attention to when those boundaries are crossed. So when that question came up, viewers didn't hear it as casual, they heard it as deliberate. Fair or not, perception matters, and in that moment perception shaped the narrative faster than facts ever could. The idea that timing wasn't accidental made the clip feel heavier, like something had been forced open rather than stumbled into. Social media amplified everything. Posts speculating about intent spread faster than posts urging caution. Screenshots replaced context, clips replaced full conversations, and suddenly the moment wasn't just about Blake's reaction, it was about whether the situation should have happened at all. That's the danger of timing paired with silence. When answers don't come, theories rush in to fill the gap. Fans weren't claiming to know the truth, they were reacting to how exposed the moment felt, and exposure, especially when it feels unnecessary, triggers protective instincts. The speculation wasn't driven by malice, it was driven by discomfort. People sensed something went too far, even if they couldn't explain exactly why. And once that feeling takes hold, timing becomes evidence, whether it deserves to be or not. By then, the story had shifted again. It wasn't just about health, or stress, or one interview question. It was about whether this moment should have happened when it did. And that question lingered long after the clip stopped playing, pulling more people into the discussion, whether they wanted to be there or not. Once the clip escaped its original context, the story stopped belonging to Blake Shelton. It belonged to the internet. And the internet doesn't wait for clarity, it moves on emotion. Within days, the moment was no longer shared as a question, it was shared as a conclusion. Titles got stronger, thumbnails got darker, and each repost pushed the narrative further from the original event. Different versions of the clip began circulating, each one telling a slightly different story. Some slowed it down to exaggerate the pause, others cropped out the moments before so the shift felt more abrupt. A few added captions that framed the moment as something inevitable, like this was always going to happen. None of that changed what actually occurred, but it changed how people felt watching it. Comment sections became echo chambers. One person would point out Blake's posture, another would interpret his expression. Soon, assumptions were treated like confirmations, not because people meant harm, but because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity feels like truth, even when it isn't. What made this narrative especially powerful was how personal it felt. Viewers weren't just analyzing a celebrity, they were projecting their own experiences onto the moment. Burnout, anxiety, being pushed too far. That emotional overlap made the story sticky. It wasn't just something to watch, it was something to relate to. Celebrity reactions, or the lack thereof, added fuel. Silence was read as strategy. Neutral statements were dissected for hidden meaning. Even unrelated posts from people in Blake's circle were pulled into the discussion and framed as subtle signals. Whether those interpretations were fair didn't matter. Once a narrative takes shape, it absorbs everything around it. Media outlets followed the momentum. Some repeated online speculation carefully, others leaned into dramatic framing without adding new information. The result was a loop. Articles referenced posts, posts referenced articles, and suddenly the story felt bigger than it ever was at the start. At that point, it didn't matter what the original explanation was. The narrative had evolved into something else entirely, a symbol, a warning, a moment people used to talk about pressure, fame, and the cost of always performing. That's how the narrative took over. Not through one lie or one exaggeration, but through layers of interpretation stacked on top of each other until the original moment was almost impossible to see clearly anymore. And once a story reaches that stage, it doesn't fade on its own. It lingers, reshaped and retold, until something finally forces people to step back and ask what they were really reacting to in the first place. After the clip spread, after speculation ran wild, Blake Shelton did something unexpected. He didn't comment. He didn't post. He didn't try to explain or defend himself. There was silence, and that silence spoke louder than any statement could. It wasn't emptiness. It was a boundary, a pause, a signal that some moments are too personal, too raw to be unpacked for headlines or social media likes. For viewers, that absence of words was jarring. People are used to instant reactions, instant clarifications. Silence feels unfinished. It invites assumptions, and the internet filled that space faster than any press release ever could. But to anyone who's been under pressure, who's carried stress quietly, that silence makes sense. It's the only way to reset, to breathe, to regain control over what's yours. And for Blake, after years of performing toughness in public, this was the first moment he could step back without performing at all. Fans noticed. They noticed how the quiet didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like intention. Even the most casual observers could sense that Blake wasn't hiding, he was protecting himself. And that distinction matters, because protecting yourself often looks like doing nothing, especially in a world that expects constant engagement. The silence also gave space for reflection. Older interviews, older jokes, moments when Blake had deflected questions suddenly looked different. Pauses that had once seemed trivial now felt like early warning signs. Laughter that seemed effortless suddenly read as armor. And the audience started to see the man behind the persona, not the celebrity curated for cameras, but the person navigating the weight of years in the spotlight. Kelly Clarkson's quiet check-ins, too, happened in the shadows, not for headlines, not for validation, but for presence, and that reinforced a lesson the clip taught without words. Support doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a statement. Sometimes showing up quietly matters more than anything public ever could. Silence can feel uncomfortable. It unsettles people who are used to narratives moving fast. But in this case, it wasn't emptiness. It was honesty. It wasn't about spinning the story or shaping perception. It was about taking a step back, letting the world observe without interference, and letting the moment breathe. And in the end, that silence left a mark. Not the kind of mark headlines chase, but a human one. A reminder that sometimes stepping back isn't weakness. It's clarity. It's control. It's the space you need to handle everything that had been building quietly for years. Blake Shelton collapsing on that couch wasn't just a headline. It wasn't just a clip to replay or debate online. It was a human signal, a moment that reminded everyone watching that even the strongest, most composed people have limits, that even those who laugh first, who deflect, who carry the weight quietly, eventually reach a point where the body, and sometimes the mind, demands attention. This moment forced people to pause, to realize that the story isn't always about drama or scandal. It's about pressure, accumulation, and the subtle ways life pushes us beyond what we can handle. The questions people asked afterward weren't about gossip. They were about care, about recognizing warning signs, about understanding that fame doesn't shield anyone from human vulnerability. And it wasn't just Blake's story. It became a mirror for anyone who has ever smiled while their chest felt tight, who has joked to cover anxiety, or who has carried more than they should. For many fans, that pause on live television became permission to acknowledge their own limits, to stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Kelly Clarkson's quiet support reinforced that lesson. Support isn't always loud. It doesn't need an audience. Sometimes it's just presence, a reminder that you aren't alone when the weight feels too heavy. And that, perhaps, is the reason this story resonated so widely. It was personal, even when it was public. Ultimately, this moment wasn't the end of a story. It was a beginning, a prompt to look at how we measure strength, at how we treat vulnerability, at how we respond when someone shows signs of struggling. It reminded people that silence can be protective, that collapse doesn't equal failure, and that honesty, especially emotional honesty, always carries a cost. When the cameras stopped rolling, when the headlines faded, the lesson remained. Behind every smile and every joke, someone might be reaching their limit. And recognizing that, Honoring that and giving space when it's needed, that's what this moment really represented. Because Blake Shelton's collapse wasn't a spectacle, it was a signal. And it's one that doesn't fade the moment the video ends. It stays with you. A quiet reminder to pause, to reflect, and to remember that even those we think have it all together are human too.